This is the Tabernacle Podcast with John Vermillion and me, Britton Bishop. What's up, John?
I'm excited.
Same.
I know I say that every time. Like every time I'm like, oh, I'm so excited about this episode.
Like
but
your glasses are fogging up. You're so excited.
I'm so excited. My glasses are fogging up. I'm like having a Clark Kent like moment right here. I need the little sticky tape right there. No, the reason I'm excited is we have a very special guest that has come all the way from Detroit, Michigan, Midtown. And I'll tell you just real quick about the story about this. Is the Tabernacle is privileged to partner with a church in Midtown called Mosaic. And those people that have been a part of our church for a while will remember years ago, we had Pastor Mick Veach visited us, and he preached a little series that kicked off a series here called Water Walkers. And he brought some of his congregation with us, and it was just a huge blessing to our church. It was right after T2 opened. And it was shortly thereafter that we became partners with this church, which is in Midtown, Detroit. And that church has grown. Pastor Mick has moved on, and they have a new pastor, and he's with us tonight.
Yes, sir.
His name is Santes Beatty. He is the husband of Nicole. He is a graduate of Kingswood in Canada. He's a native of North Carolina. He's had 5 children, which means he's in the big leagues. And I think it was sometime earlier this week, we've been looking for a chance to get together and meet face to face. We've had a Zoom, and then he just randomly said, "Hey, we're coming up to TC, just getting a little spring break, coming north like weird people do." I don't know why you come north, go south. So that might be a little bit messed up. But he said he's coming north, and we saw an opportunity to get him on the podcast. So, So
cool.
Santes, welcome.
Hey.
See, I said I was going to say it weird. Santes.
Hey, any way you want to swing it. But it's good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a joy to, just be at Tabernacle for the very first time. 2, to be able to just come and say thank you to you and to your congregation and to your leadership for just the way in which you have found, just inspired us by your generosity and your commitment to the kingdom. Like so often, we concentrate on our smaller kingdoms, right, in ministry, and it's so cool to be a part of something where people are really interested in the big K kingdom and not the smaller K. So, thank you to your congregation and to you for your willingness to partner in this way. Yeah,
right. And we would say thank you for giving us an opportunity to be a part of what God's doing in Detroit. I heard a little bit from you when we had the Zoom. I've heard over the years from other people in your church, but it's been too long coming. I think in the pre-show, we were talking about the fact that you've been there 2.5 years, and you actually started there right before the pandemic. So it's kind of everything it was the same as you.
Yep.
You actually got hired during pandemic,
my first day on staff was the first virtual Sunday. It was my first
serious?
Sunday. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But only because you guys are also about kingdom with a big K, can we have any sort of partnership with what God's doing in Detroit? So, because we're rural, flyover, way up north. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Britton, what do we talk about, bud?
Sweet. Yeah. I think just an opportunity for us just to kick it, get to know you, get to know how God has kind of gotten you to where you are just today, being the lead pastor of Mosaic Midtown, but also just, your story. You're more than just a guy that lives in Detroit. There's been a much longer story, and I think something that our listeners have come to love is this idea of changed life stories. And so we don't have to do the whole thing, but even maybe if it's just like what. So I'll just start with questions, and this is kind of there's a few rules at the Tabernacle Podcast, and this is our podcast, and today this is your podcast.
So we do whatever we want,
and you can do whatever you want. So if I say something stupid, and you're like, "Yeah, I'm not answering that," people understand. We won't edit anything, and
that'll happen.
They'll just know we're stupid. So we'll just start. So at what age did you know ministry was kind of what God was calling you to with your life?
Oh man, that's crazy. I would say I probably knew at 12. It was right around the time my grandfather passed. And my earliest memory is being in my mom's arms and hearing the preacher or the pastor of our church call for my grandfather, who was not he was not in ministry formally. He would be what many would have called a deacon or a trustee, right? But he was known as this man of prayer. I felt like when my grandfather prayed, heaven moved. And
he could pray the paint off the walls.
He could pray, man. He was a prayer warrior, but he was a farmer, right? He was a marketplace guy, and so that's my earliest memory. And when he passed away, before he passed, on the farm or the land where my grandmother and he lived, they had like all of these fruit trees, and and he walked us around the farm, all of the grandchildren. And I'll never forget, before we went back to the house, he laid his withered, calloused hands on my forehead and gave me his blessing. And that happened to me at 12. And we went back to the house, in a matter of a few hours later, he passed away on site right there in front of us. And that was probably my earliest memory of, okay, there's something different. There's something special. I don't know fully what that means. Yeah. But I know that what just happened is of God. And it's part of the reason why I ran from it.
You too.
For 10 years, right? Like I went back into the church. My dad was a pastor. My mom's in ministry too. So I had a double whammy, like double PK. Those first couple years were good, but by 14, I became disillusioned with the church. Like, I was cynical of the church. You know what it's like when you see how church folk treat church leaders. And I didn't want to have anything to do with it, but I knew I had to go. I knew I had to kind of keep up the good church face, right, and not do anything to embarrass my parents. But I had kind of fallen away and was looking in other spaces, and then God wrecked my world and brought me back 10 years later. But yeah, that's kind of how that first inkling of the call.
And this is in Greensboro, North Carolina?
That was in Rayford, North Carolina, which is right outside of Fayetteville. Fort Bragg area is where we lived and where I grew up. Yeah.
Very cool. So 12, Grandpa gives the blessing. And
how epic is that?
Oh, it was. I was like, man, that's so cool.
That's so Old Testament.
I know. Yeah.
That's so cool. But
what was his name?
Cicero.
So did he go like Britton? Was he like Prophet Cicero?
No, he was just farmer, good guy.
Okay.
Cicero. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. So at 12, so then you're 14, stuff kind of, got to keep doing this, got to save face for the parents, whatever. Something I've heard you describe often, and some other people that have been a part of the podcast that grew up in kind of a PK, MK home, was this idea of living in a glass house.
Yeah.
And so so that kind of affected a little bit of like, man, like I've got this other thing going on, but I have to keep up image for the family and for that stuff.
Yeah, and I grew up in two very different families, right? Like, so my dad's side, which is where my grandfather that I just described was on that side, so very churchy, but we didn't talk about problems on that side of the family. Everything was always great. And we know that's not always true.
Right, yeah.
Right?
A lot of hiding, a lot of, and then on my mom's side, like everything was like in your face, right? That was a place where you go and there was a lot of drinking. Somebody might be drunk, laying out on the floor at a event, right? And so I lived in these two different worlds. I appreciated different parts of both. And I think my struggle was the inability to face things with my dad's side of the family. And that's kind of how it showed up in relating to church. Like I didn't think it was real. Like I knew God was real, but I wasn't sure how to live that real life. Even though I saw some of it in my parents, I just didn't think it could be for me. And I saw how you can wild out though, right? Like I saw that. Like it wasn't like there wasn't anybody who loved Jesus on that side of the family. It was just a different lifestyle, right? It was just a different way of. And they told you what they thought, right? It was real. And so these two worlds, and you'll find like later in my life, there's always this tension between these two worlds, and I have to figure out with God's help how to allow them to coexist. And that was one of those tensions for me, is just two different ways of living as a family. And then that comes full circle a little bit later.
Yeah. So kind of grow, because you said 10 years, so I'm trying to do the math in my head, but in the words of Forrest Gump, I'm not a smart man. But
it's all right. You're a public school kid. You got this.
Yeah, public school kid. But so kind of things go on. You graduate. Did you go to college immediately, or?
Yeah. I was a student athlete. So ended up going. I was recruited by a lot of D1 schools. I played 3 sports: football, basketball, and baseball. But I was really good at baseball and football. And so I loved baseball the most, but I got more attention playing football. So I was a quarterback. I was in basketball. I played different positions. I was mostly the defender, right? The guy that defended the the best player on the other team. And then I was a pitcher and a shortstop, play shortstop in baseball. And so I ended up going, my senior year, this is important to note, like my senior year, about 2 weeks before the season starts, we find out that one of our star players is murdered, right? So he's murdered, drug deal gone bad. And so that's how the season starts. So like the previous year, we were ranked in the state, did really, really well. But my senior year, and around that time, right before the season starts, a 350-pound lineman falls on me in practice, and I separate my shoulder. I separate my throwing shoulder. And so early on in the season, we moved me from quarterback to running back.
Gotcha.
And we moved up a quarterback from JV who ended up playing at Clemson. But I had
small detail.
Yeah, small detail. But I had a lot of D1 prospects, but that was kind of a turning point, which is a good thing because I feel like had I gone D1 and played, my life would have probably been radically different. Probably would have played football a lot longer. But thankfully, with everything going down the way it did, I ended up choosing, even though I had an appointment to West Point, thankfully, I didn't go there and play because I would have not really been a quarterback. I would have been more of a running back, and I probably would have had some CTE issues because of
I can relate
the offense they run.
Yeah.
But ended up choosing the small Quaker liberal arts college in Greensboro.
Okay, cool.
And went there and played football. I'll never forget
American football, right?
Yeah, American football.
Hey, come on,
not the international
Can't
one.
leave me hanging here.
Not
Come
the
on.
international one.
Come on.
Hey, this is the
I mean,
international
I don't
one.
know.
Holding it down over here.
I was funny story. I was in Ghana, West Africa, and I flew in and I see this huge stadium, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, what football team plays here?
Yeah.
And they look at me and they're like, football or American football? I was like, American football. I was like, none of that. They were like, none of that. None of
Those
that
are my
here.
people.
I had to
Those are
admit
my
to 'em.
people.
Yeah, I had to admit I was watching some show, and the Premier League teams do have cool stadiums,
Yes, they do.
but there's no 350-pound men falling on you, separating your shoulder.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's different.
Which, complete sidebar, this is an offensive tackle. So I don't know if he'd have fallen on
yes.
you or
Yeah,
not.
but
but
3 college athletes sitting here together, so
yeah, there you
It
go.
was fun.
we all
It was
have a
fun.
little bit of CTE.
Football, and football.
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 So
Cool.
so yeah. So
Anyway,
went
sorry.
to a Quaker institution. I gave my life to Christ in a AME Zion Black church. So as you can imagine, coming to a Quaker institution and going to Quaker meeting was like culture shock.
You're like a
right?
theological mutt.
I know. I've been all over the place. It continues.
That's all right. This
It
is good.
continues.
Oh, I know,
This is
because I
not
know
the
where
end.
you're at now. I love this. Yeah.
So I'm there. I'm a student athlete, and it gets worse before it gets better. Like I am doing everything I can possibly before I know God's going to call me back into what I'm supposed to be doing. And I actually get into a car accident. Like there's a Sunday before my car accident, I'm at my father's church, and I hear God so clearly say, come home. It was like prodigal son type experience. I go back up to Greensboro. I don't make the commitment. And the next day I have a terrible car accident where I should have been killed in this car accident. It flips over in the middle of a rainstorm. I'm in the middle of this median, cars passing both sides. And I hear God say, if you don't come now, you'll be a statistic. It was so clear. I'm sitting there crying, weeping, because I know if I don't make this decision now, I may not be alive the next day. And so I say yes to Jesus. The police officers who are coming to check on me are not really sure if I'm okay. I get home, and the first call is from one of my best friends who wasn't walking with Jesus. And before I could even get it out of my mouth, he says, there's something different about you. I hear something different in your voice. And I'm like, how do you know? He's like, I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you're different. And that started this. I felt like Paul. I felt like I was behind. I should have, been following Jesus, a whole lot sooner. And so it was like, okay, you got to pick up the pieces and make up time. And so I've been running for Jesus ever since. 22.
Yeah.
I'm 47 now. So pretty cool. 25 years
Awesome.
later.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm relating on deep levels over
Yeah.
here. So you pretty much just told my story with some different exit ramps. But yeah,
Wow.
similar upbringing, all that stuff. Was in college, kind of had that moment.
Yeah.
Well, I was trying to go to church, and this preacher came, and I stopped going to church.
Oh, here we go again. Here we go again. They don't want to hear this.
No, I'm not telling that. But but yeah, very similar story. So yeah, I relate, and I love that you said, man, you gave Jesus your yes. If you ever listen to anything I say, that usually is where I end up. So,
and for clarity's sake, he was not trying to go to church. There was food there.
Yeah,
there was food and girls, and he was a little sensitive.
But
I'm 100% relating with you on the. Like, I get that part where somewhere in the back of your mind or even in your heart, you've got a feeling that he's called you. And because I remember being at a Christian institution, and I just didn't want to be like the Christian ministries majors. Yeah. So I ran as far away from that. I don't want to wear a little white shirt and a little tie and carry a briefcase around and, whatever all that stuff meant.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is, let's keep going.
Yeah. So that happens. Car, something's different, right?
Yep.
Giving your yes to Jesus. So kind of in your head, were you still playing ball at that point, or was?
No, I had graduated. I had started working at Guilford College, which is where I went to school. And crazy cool thing. So I'm on staff. This happens in January of 1998. About a month in to my walk with Jesus, there's this guy who's also a former football player who starts discipling me. Start going to this larger Black Baptist church, and they call for a fast. They actually call for it in January, but I don't even know what that is, right? Like, I don't know how you do that.
Right.
And so it takes me about a month to figure out that I'm going to fast. And so not knowing anything about fasting, I never fasted before a day in my life, I commit to a 40-day fast, just water for the first time. And in the middle of that fast, there's this major racial incident that happens on the college campus where I'm working. And I'm on the search committee for this job, which was the director of multicultural education. They stop the search and they say, we can't hire anybody from outside of the school. We have to hire somebody from within or somebody that's an alum. And the president of the school taps me on the shoulder in that moment and says, I think it's you. Would you take this job, right? Like, this is a job that's for somebody with a doctorate. I'm just graduating with an undergrad, a BS, right? And I say no. I tell him no. Like, I'm not doing it. Talk about walking on water, right? Like, I'm not Jesus. Like, what you're asking this person to do, I can't do it. So I went, because I was a former Black student on campus, I go to the Black students, I go to the Black faculty and staff, and I tell them about this offer. And the Black faculty look at me and say, you have to take this. You can reframe the job, but you have to take this. Like, we need you to take this role. I felt kind of like MLK, right? When you study what happened with MLK early in the movement, the civil rights movement, he's actually brought on not necessarily because of his brilliance. They bring him on because they think they can control him. And that was my concern in this role. And I was like, I'm young, I don't know. And they're like, we will guide you. We will help you. And so I step into this role. First I go back to the students and to the faculty and staff, and I say, we're going to write this job description differently. And then I'm going to take it to them. They're probably going to say no. Take it to them in the middle of this fast that I'm on. And they say yes. They say yes. And so that was the beginning of this journey that kind of leads into some of the things that I'm doing now in ministry. But I became the director of multicultural education at the age of 22. My first day on the job, listen to this. This is crazy. My first day on the job, I'm sitting across the table. On my side of the table is ML Carr from the Boston Celtics. You probably know that name. Won a championship with the Celtics. He's one of our trustees. There's a big furniture, because we're in High Point area, furniture guy that's on the board. My college president, our college lawyer. On the other side of the table are 6 members of the NAACP, and they are fuming because our president at the time said something that was highly insensitive. And so I'm sitting on that side of the table with the college. That was my first day on the job at the age 22. Had bought a new suit and everything. But it was crazy. It was crazy. I was like, God, I don't have a clue of why you're doing this, what you want me to do, how you want me to lead. But I look back on it now, it was my first pastorate. It was my first pastorate. And God said to me so clearly, love these students, love this community, and you will see the fruit of why I put you here. So I served in that role for almost 10 years.
Wow.
For almost 10 years. I ended up feeling called to ministry and responding to the call of ministry, being a youth pastor bivocationally in that role for a number of years. and came on staff at a predominantly Black Baptist church in the area. But then also felt like these two worlds, like this idea of these tensions surface again, right? This Quaker liberal arts college that really wanted me to focus in on diversity and racial reconciliation and justice. And then I have this predominantly Black Baptist church that is really concerned about the community and spiritual formation and discipleship. And these two worlds didn't want to coexist, interestingly. And so I found myself really seeking, and I also knew that this church I was at was kind of grooming me to be the next lead pastor. And I knew my wife and I were like, I don't think this is where we're supposed to be. Nothing bad about the church. We just knew that wasn't a good fit for us. And so that's when I started just praying and seeking with my wife about next steps. And God orchestrated this crazy move to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where we came on staff, both of us, at Kentwood Community Church. It was the first healthy multi-ethnic church that we had been a part of. And so I came on staff as a youth pastor and a part of the teaching team. My wife was on staff in children's ministry. And that's when I started to see that this whole idea of diversity and some of the things that I had learned along the way, that it was more of a discipleship issue than a diversity issue. And so, of course, if it's a diversity issue, it's optional. If it's a discipleship issue, it's not. And so began to do work there. Here's the crazy thing. So I was in youth ministry. There were basically two different youth groups, right? So there was a youth group that met on Sundays, which was kind of your traditional youth group, Sunday nights. And then there was a Friday night youth group that was more kind of outreach, kids from the community whose parents didn't go to the church. Sunday nights, kids, their parents did go to the church. And so there were two full-time positions for those two realities. And both of those people had exited those positions and gone to other one had started a parachurch organization. Some of you know, maybe you know Jeff Eckert, who started Never the Same.
I knew him when he was just a little pup.
Now doing great stuff at Daybreak. But and then there was another guy who actually was the person that God had used to orchestrate my move to Grand Rapids in the first place. He was doing outreach, and so he moved into the outreach role because Kyle had stepped into the lead pastor role. And so these two full-time positions, because they knew my history in diversity and racial reconciliation and ministry, they said, why don't you bring these two worlds together, right? Sounded amazing on paper.
I think I've written papers like that, haven't I, Britton?
One of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, right? Because there were these two worlds, predominantly Black students from the community and Hispanic students, Latino students, poor white students on one end on Friday nights and after school program, and then predominantly white middle class students on Sunday night. And here I am supposed to bring these two worlds together. And so made a lot of mistakes, got a lot of stuff right. And after 4 years of being there, our denomination knew or found out about some of the work we were doing and said, okay, we want you to do some of that for our entire denomination. And so they invited me once again to start this new department, if you will, within church multiplication and discipleship, and it was called Multiethnic Ministry. So I became the director of Multiethnic Ministries. So very similar to what I was doing at this college many years before. I'm now stepping into this for not just the local church, but for the kingdom, for this denomination, and really training and developing pastors, coaching and training churches and regions and districts, and really began to see this movement happen. And at that time, Dr. Joanne Lyon was our general superintendent, and we're thinking, okay, I'm going to stay at this healthy multi-ethnic church. I'm going to, we've planted some roots here in Grand Rapids. They'll let us stay. And Dr. Lyon, who's kind of like E.F. Hutton in our denomination.
I met her too.
When she speaks, everybody listens. And she says, no, I need you to move. And I'm like, why would we move? And she says, I don't just want you to help our denomination. I need you to change the culture of this building. And so we moved because she said so. No, I think God was speaking through her. And so we moved from Grand Rapids to Indianapolis and set up shop there. And once I got there, I realized why she said what she said. Like, there's some things you can only do when there's a proximity dynamic. And some things you need to have a ministry of presence. And so not only did God begin to shift our denomination, which is Wesleyan, but also begin to shift what's happening in our building there in Indianapolis. And so that was a pretty cool thing.
So there was one little thing that we missed. Is somewhere along the way, Santes got married.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, did we just, was that
Yes.
ChristianTingle.com? Was that, I mean, was that somebody you grew up with, you know? I mean, I just want to, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. Yeah, but she might listen to this. And so we just got to make sure, I got to look out for you, right?
Good stuff, man. Thanks. Good call. So like right after I graduated from undergrad, my wife graduated from UNC Charlotte, moved back to Greensboro. I moved from this larger Black Baptist church to this smaller, probably 800, 700, 800. Some people might not consider that small, but smaller than the church I was at. And the first Sunday I was there, and I wasn't going to meet anybody, but I just see this beautiful young woman in this cream suit that approaches me, and I just kind of give her the wave. And needless to say, we started to do, there's a whole story behind this that's pretty crazy about how my pastor set us up.
Pay attention, Benjamin. This might come in handy later.
He set us up, and we didn't know it, but I won't give you that story, maybe another time. But we started doing young adult ministry together. Of course, I was on a college campus working. She had done young adult ministry before. She had just graduated.
He had a wonderful plan for your life.
He had a great plan for our lives.
So you're not dating?
We're not dating.
So
we're
he put
serving.
the beautiful woman in the cream dress and you
in the same
If
ministry.
the church lady from Saturday Night Live was here, isn't that convenient? I can't even do that voice anymore. But yeah, okay, sorry. So you're doing college ministry together.
Doing college. Matter of fact, I meet this pastor. I'd never been to his church. I meet him while we're doing a march from Greensboro, North Carolina to Raleigh, North Carolina. It was kind of a social holiness type thing. And so he tells me then, like, if you ever, get a sense of needing to find another church, a local church, just know that this is who we are, and I'd love to connect you with our young adult ministry. And he's having this conversation with her as well. And it's not until I tell him that I'm ready to propose to her that the information starts to unfold.
Oh, you didn't know he was the puppet master? Oh, wow.
He's been planning this the whole time. But he was very discreet.
That's so cool.
He came in, he said, I'm going to propose. He said, I know.
I've been praying for this, brother.
It's been predestined.
So met her. My wife's name is Nicole, and we did young adult ministry for a number of years.
That's cool.
Then I stepped into the youth ministry. So
That's
here we
awesome.
are. We'll celebrate 20 years next year. We were just talking about this. In that wild, outlandish stage, I had a child out of wedlock, so I was a single dad at the time when I met my wife. And so we've had 5 kids, right?
Wow.
So my oldest is 27, got a 1-year-old grandbaby, and we've had 4 kids since then.
Awesome.
We lost one before my 14-year-old, so Christian. We lost to a miscarriage, but 3 are at home, and 1 is with Jesus, and the other is in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Nice.
So thank you for bringing that up, because I want to make sure
No,
a lot of what we do is centered around family and ministry, and so I'm glad you reminded me to speak on that.
Yeah. So you're a part of the Wesleyan denomination, and I'm familiar with a bunch of the names that you're dropping there because you know my folks. They're dyed in the wool. I was born and raised in that ghetto, the Wesleyan ghetto, right?
Yeah.
But from the denominational headquarters where you're doing really important work, and kudos to your general superintendent for seeing that ministry of presence and all that. How did you get from there to Canada? Because this is part of you've been Zion AME. You've been Quaker. Well, not Quaker. At least you've been under that influence.
Yep.
We had the wild stuff in between.
Yep.
You've been Baptist. Now you're Wesleyan, and then you get the Canadian side of things.
Yeah. Well, I didn't go to Kingswood, but I teach for Kingswood.
You taught at Kingswood.
Yeah,
got it.
I teach at Kingswood, but I went to. But here's another interesting ripple. I got my master's at Huntington University in Indiana, which is a United Brethren school.
There you go.
So,
Theological muck, baby.
If you want to just add another one to the mix,
I know that school too.
There you go. So so did
gotcha.
my master's work there, and so actually the connection to Kentwood came through a professor at Huntington.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we were at a conference. Long story short, we were at a conference in Atlanta. And 2 leaders, one of whom I mentioned already, another who I don't know if you know, Ian Nacy. They're at this National Workers Convention. They meet with a guy named Dave Ron, who's one of the smartest people I've ever met, author of 3 Story and on evangelism, things of that nature. Anyway, they ask him, this is what we're looking for the next high school pastor of our church in Kentwood, Michigan. Who do you know? And we're in this meeting, I kid you not. He apparently looks over in my direction and points at me and says he's sitting over there, but he'll never leave North Carolina.
Wow.
He does not know that my wife and I have been wrestling
yeah.
and praying about our next assignment. And we thought, of course, we were going to stay in North Carolina. You know, I was going to maybe be a youth pastor at one of my mentors' churches. And he points at me. These guys walk over boldly, tap me on the shoulder and say, we need to talk to you. So they start talking about this church in Kentwood. They don't know my wife was born in Grand Rapids, which is
I didn't know that.
All these connections, right? Crazy.
Wow.
And so when I lean back and say, where's your church? They think that I'm like backing out, but I'm actually leaning in to say, this is what you've been doing, God. So that's how we got connected to the Wesleyan Church. And the rest is history. So I was in Indianapolis for 2 years working at headquarters, and then they allowed me to work remotely. So we ended up moving back to North Carolina, where we were for 3.5 years, almost 4. And then we're in this space where we're preparing for retirement, y'all. Y'all know how it is. You know, you find the house that you can, have grandbabies in. You got land, you got a lake.
Got a porch and a swing.
Yeah, you got all that stuff, great schools.
Sweet
the whole
tea.
thing.
Baby, would you bring me sweet tea?
Yeah, it's the whole thing. And then God speaks, right? And we had actually, we had felt like there was a tension in early 2019 of kind of making a shift. But once again, we're thinking it's going to be somewhere local. It's probably going to be in North Carolina. And, I was offered this incredible role to be a CEO of a parachurch, was this close to signing on the dotted line. Seemed like a great fit. And then God opens this door at Mosaic. I literally was at Kentwood Community Church the last Sunday in August of 2019. And it was the only time they've ever asked me to preach on multiethnic ministry. I preach on multiethnic ministry. They asked me to show a video before I get up to preach. The video that God gave me to show was a video of Mick Veach and Mosaic Midtown Church. I had no idea that Mick had already said yes to this church. Had no idea.
That he was coming to Kentwood.
That the week before he said yes, or maybe 2 weeks before he said yes, but it hadn't gone public yet. So the only people who knew was the search committee and the board. And so when I said I'm going to show this video, I get all these calls and I get these text messages. They think I know something I don't know. And so I get up and
this is going to be their new lead pastor. And you are just like,
they think I'm exposing it.
This guy's got this multi-ethnic diverse church in Midtown, and I'm going to use them as an example. I'm showing this video, and lo and behold, this is the guy they've already selected to move from there to where you're at. You guys are playing church swap.
Exactly. And I don't know that in a few days I'm going to realize I'm not going to do this CEO of a parachurch, but this is the church I'm supposed to go to. But that ball can't drop until Mick commits to KCC. And so I had already been having conversations with leaders about the fact that I was feeling called back to the local church, that I knew it had to be a healthy multi-ethnic church, that I knew it had to be a church that was able to be the kind of space where I could also have a national voice and train leaders and develop people internationally and globally, but also that I could be in the local church again. And I couldn't find the church, right? And because I couldn't find the church, I leaned towards the parachurch space first to say, well, then I'll find a church and God flipped the script. And so so a few days later, I get this email about Mick stepping in as the lead pastor. I text him, and before my phone could hit the bed, it pinged. And Mick had already responded. And his message was, I need your help finding the next campus pastor for Mosaic. And so I call him. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like campus pastor, what does that mean? So he starts to describe what they're going to do, because they were kind of planning to raise somebody up from Mosaic. That was the original plan. And that Mosaic would be a campus of KCC. And so I start to describe to him, like, like, okay, I'll help find you people. I know people all over the denomination. I know people outside of the denomination. I'll help find somebody. I call 2 people. The first 2 people I call, I start describing this church and this opportunity. Both of them say the exact same thing to me. This sounds amazing, but it sounds like something custom made for you. And by the time the second person says it, I lean back in my chair and I'm like, oh, goodness. My wife is sitting on the couch in the other room. I go into the room because I knew what was going to happen if I stayed. I knock on the door. I walk in. I said, babe, I need you to be praying about Detroit. And I slowly closed the door.
You just backed out.
Because her head lifts up off the couch and she looks at me and she's like, Detroit. And I was like,
my.
Oh, yeah, because she's from Grand Rapids. So she.
Yeah, she was born in Grand Rapids, but that's a Carolina girl. That is like, a Carolina girl.
Don't know what else to tell you, but I think it's beginning. So that led to a series of, so the very next week, this is crazy, cool story. The very next week, I am, my team at the headquarters of the Wesleyan Church is prepared to do a retreat that we had planned in January, which is around the time I began to hear and feel like we were going to make it a transition. Guess where this retreat that was planned in January was going to be held? Mosaic Midtown Church. So I say to Mick, like, this is crazy, Mick, but I'm going to be at your church in a week. And so all these things that we're praying about, thinking about, like, let's talk once I come to Mosaic and to Detroit. I'd never been to the church. I've been to Detroit before, never to the church. And when I tell you that when we drove up on the property, I knew. I prayed, like the same feeling I had when we drove up on KCC's property. I knew. And then God did all of these crazy cool. So for example, we get off the bus and most people didn't know this, but I had a secret prayer that if I ever became a lead pastor of a multi-ethnic church, I prayed that God would give me a pastor who had training as a culinary chef. So very few people knew this. I think maybe one other person, my accountability partner.
Oh, okay, but why? Was that just to test God or because you like really good food?
Because food is the 6th love language.
Amen.
Come on, somebody.
Praise God.
Can you get behind that?
Can I get a witness?
God.
Yes. Yes.
I know. Is it Gary Chapman that does the 5 love languages? He left one off. It's food.
Well, that's actually what I told my fiance when we first. I was like, I just want you to know, mine is turkey sandwiches, and a part of that is, So yeah. So I'm with you.
That is trippy that you would say that because I know where the story's going.
Yeah. So I step off this bus, like literally, I'm telling y'all, I step off the bus. It's a Tuesday, and right outside of the parking lot, there are these tables set up. They're feeding people in the community. They're connecting with the community. The first person I step up to is this African-American man named Michael. And I had seen Michael in this video that I had shown before and never really spent a lot of time with him. And so I'm looking at this spread and I'm like, man, this looks amazing. You all do this every day, or you do this often? And he starts describing what they did out front for the community. And I was like, man, this looks like something that a chef would put together, right? And he says, by the way, I'm a trained chef. I'm the assistant pastor of this church. And my head drops because I'm like, God, you're showing off now.
He's flexing.
You are showing off right now. And so about 11 of those things happened during that day that I was there. But that was the first one after.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
That's how I met the staff of Mosaic and the work that Pastor Mick had been doing there, the groundwork, him and many of the other leaders just fit the DNA of who we are and what we're about. And so it was just a great fit. I came on as the campus pastor. 2 months later, Pastor Mick moved to Grand Rapids in September. I come on staff officially in November. And then, I'm commuting for 2 months. And then, like I said before, we move right before the pandemic, 2.5 months before the pandemic. So I've been serving as lead pastor mostly during a pandemic, which has been quite the challenge, as well as moving a family, from North Carolina to Michigan. But I love the mission and vision of Mosaic. It has pretty much stayed the same. Like our mission and vision has stayed the same. Our values have shifted a little bit, but and how we do things have shifted a little bit just because of who I am and the difference in what I bring to the table. But it builds on the legacy and the work that Pastor Mick and others laid down before, and we're really kind of returning to our roots. Maybe people know this, maybe they don't, but the work that kind of I stand on the shoulders of actually started with a guy by the name of Mark Judkins, who was a pastor and came into Detroit thinking originally that he was going to be a missionary to Zambia, but he was a businessman who felt called to Detroit. He comes into Detroit and he starts a community center with his wife. And that community center grows into this incredible work in the northwest side of Detroit. And it's a community center. It has social enterprises, and people want a church to come out of it. So it moves into the church space. Around that time, the leader who was from the community that he was working with dies unexpectedly. And so this pairing of this businessman who's kind of the operations person and this person from the community who is like connected and has credibility, one part of that 1-2 punch dies. And as you can imagine, a lot of the things with the community center begin to move in a different direction. And it's around that time that Pastor Mick feels called to move to Detroit and start this church called Mosaic. And so these worlds of the community center and the church begin to coexist. And so we ended up closing down the community center with the dream that Mosaic would eventually be not only a church, but also a community center. So when we bought our building, we bought it with the idea in mind that the upper level would be the church, but the lower level would be a community center. And so that space is still a part of that vision, that we would do something in that bottom part of the building to meet needs, to address some of the concerns in our community. But we're getting back to that DNA, right? So we ended up closing the community center, used some of those resources to help buy the building and sustain the building that we're in. And we purchased it at a very critical time, like it's around the time when gentrification, which is not always a good thing, but gentrification was moving through Midtown Detroit. The building was in shambles. A church was actually still meeting there, but I don't know how.
Yeah.
And ended up purchasing the building, renovating the building. And now we've been using it as a ministry center to the community. But we do believe what God is doing is pulling us back into that DNA of being a community center. Community centers are not as needed in Midtown as they are in other parts of Detroit. So we know that what we're called to do as an extension of the church and as a community engagement, which is one of our values, we have found other like hubs and ministry centers throughout the city of Detroit. We have people in Hamtramck and Dearborn, but we want to get back to that northwest side of Detroit. And would you believe that we started to dream about, okay, how do we leverage the space that we have better? And so we started renting our building to 2 churches on the weekend. So we meet on Sundays. We have a church that meets on Saturday mornings, and we had a church that was meeting on Sunday afternoons. The church that meets on Saturday mornings has a building in Northwest Detroit. And so I'm sitting with this pastor, and it's one of these crazy conversations. And I'm like, man, here's our vision. Here are some of the things that we want to do. We want to do some things in our basement that are different, like a leadership center. We currently have our food pantry and our clothing closet and some other things down there, but we'd like to move them to another space where it's residential. And so he's looking at me and he's like, I can't believe you're saying this. He's like, we have a building that is paid for, and that's what we've always hoped would happen from that building. Let me take you over so you can see it.
Wow.
So we drive over to this building, and when I say ministry is not about buildings. We learned that in the pandemic. If we haven't learned that by now,
right.
Shame on us. But what we also have learned is that sometimes when you have a strategic location and a space to serve people, love people, meet people where they are, some unique things can happen. And so this pastor just starts to dream with us. And we literally wrote a proposal 2 weeks ago and presented to this church where hopefully there's very little, if no money exchanged with the opportunity for us to use their building for the things that we're talking about in our mission and vision.
In
values.
The space that you want to do it to,
in the
right?
space. Like literally it is about 1.5 miles from where the community center was. And it's in the same community where the pastor that I mentioned, Pastor Michael, who is our outreach pastor, he lives in that community. He lives in the community.
So yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But that's how God works. And so we do have to, before we go in, there are a few things we have to do, like just with the building, not a lot of major things, but a few things. But it's basically a building we could use as soon as we want to, and we're praying about that happening sometime this spring, going into the summer. So yeah, ministry happening in Detroit in a new location, and we believe it's not the only one, that these hubs will pop up all around Detroit. Yeah,
for me, that's pretty awesome because those of us that have lived in Michigan for a while, I've been here the last 18 years, and Detroit was a place that was dying. And particularly those parts of Detroit that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And now to see people moving into those places, not just to meet needs, but I'm excited about the fact that there's not just Mosaic, but there's other churches. I assume they're church plants that are like, hey, here's a space, can we use it on Saturday morning? Yes. Here's a space, can we use it on Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, our vision, because what we're really about, like, we want to know him and make it known. We really want to be a leader-raising, disciple-making movement that like plants or starts multi-ethnic expressions of the gospel locally and globally. But in order to do that, in order to make disciples, we have to be where people are. And the cool thing about Midtown is that it is poppin', it is business, it is nonprofits, it's partially residential, but it's mostly business. And so the tone of Midtown is very different than the tone of this building and some other spaces where we want to be. But the goal is really to make disciples. And we have so many people who feel a call from God in the marketplace, some who feel a call in vocational ministry. But we recognize that in order to do that well, like they can't just be in Midtown. They can't just be in our church, right? They have to be in other spaces and other places, making disciples, meeting needs, addressing what's happening in the community. And so we're really trying to develop a culture where it's not a come and see, but a go and be. And it's not this we can do it, you can help approach, but you can do it, we want to help. Like we want to resource you to do what God called you to do.
Oh, God's called you to that?
Yeah. Let's go. How do we get that happen?
Yeah,
right?
He is a quote machine. He's a quote machine. He's a quote machine.
Yeah, I literally had to get my phone out to write down to make disciples. You have to be where the people are.
You got to be where they are.
That's right. That's right. So we're seeing some of that happen, and people really being raised up and being sent out. And I've said to our church more than once, we may not be a large church. Like we may be a hub, like we may be a sending center, we may be an equipping center. And so like let's not shoot for the big church model. Let's shoot for the vision of making disciples and sending people out. And if we do that well, all the other stuff will take care of itself. But that requires a paradigm shift. It requires things that are not so polished sometimes because we're constantly developing people. Also because we've sent some of our best, right? And when you send some of your best out, sometimes you feel a little bit of the hurt, right? When you send your best out, okay, how do we replace this person? You can't replace them, but you can raise up somebody that was an apprentice or that kind of came alongside them who can step into that, but they're just going to step into it differently. And so, we've seen some of that begin to happen, and a lot of it is some of the fruit of the work that Pastor Mick and others did before I got there. I can't take credit for any of that, but we're seeing some of that kingdom fruit come. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
So when I called you in January, I think it was. I think one of the things, and you may not be able to answer this specifically yet, but I specifically wanted to know, okay, how can the Tabernacle further partner with Mosaic Church? Because we don't want to just be friends from afar because of even what you just said about ministry. You don't do ministry to people. You do ministry with people, right?
That's right.
So, and in full disclosure, you were a big part of this because you were looking at, hey, I need some opportunities for our student ministry. And so just an offhand conversation and coming out of Christmas, it was like, you know what, we're partners with this church in Midtown. I'm going to call the pastor. And, and so I texted Mick, and he gave me your digits, so you can blame him. But you and I were on a Zoom about a week later, and it was like this is the next step in how can we together further your vision, and also how can we be blessed by what you have. So for me, I'd love to know, like, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing right now as a church, as a ministry? You want to be a disciple-making movement. Like, what are the big roadblocks that you're facing right now?
Yeah, great question. One of them is that culture shift, right, from an attractional model to a disciple-making model. Like, some of it is just kind of a culture shift for some of our people who mostly are churched, understanding that that's a big challenge. I think secondly, I pray this prayer almost daily. God, help me to not get in the way of what you're doing. And so one of the things that we found is that we have so many people who are ready to go, who are ready to kind of launch out. And part of what they need is not only the infrastructure to help develop them and sustain them, but also the support and the mentoring to go out and do it. So one of the things that we made, we stepped out in faith, and we hired someone that kind of embodies part of where we're going, not just where we are. So we created a new position called the Discipleship and Deployment Pastor, because the discipleship side of it, and of course, this discipleship doesn't fall on him solely, but it was a step of faith to say this is important enough to let's create a position that focuses on these two things. And so now that as that culture is being shifted, we also need to have the spaces where people can go live that out, right? They're responding to their call, they're triangulating their call. Okay, so what do I do? And so the next piece for us, and this is where buildings come in. So I think we had some of this conversation, because in Detroit is a very church city. It's very churched. Now, some of the churched environments are very unhealthy. The theology is just off. The prosperity gospel is very rampant in Detroit, and we know where that leads. And so part of what we want to do is create healthy spaces for people to start ministries and fresh expressions and micro churches, house churches, and also to create learning centers, leadership centers, hubs for ministry. So we're really, and this may sound sacrilegious, so pray for me. But I was out.
You're in the right place.
Yeah, I was out. I was out in Long Beach, California, doing some multiplication work, and one of my buddies pastors a very large church in Long Beach, and so we're out on a Tuesday night, and we're grabbing coffee, and we're at this place called the Hangar. And if you've ever been to Long Beach, you know what I'm talking about. It was a place that used to be owned by Boeing Jet, and it's become this space where the community gathers, and there are restaurants and spaces outside for kids and families to play. So I'm looking at him, and we almost think it at the same time. And I'm like, how many people are at your church right now? And he was like, not very many. He said, probably a MOPS group, like maybe 30 people. And I'm thinking, like, on a Tuesday night, we're having Bible study, but right now it's all online. There's probably nobody at my church right now. And in that moment, something struck me that's been nagging at me for a long time is, what is it that the Hangar figured out that we haven't? And so, it started this continued conversation that what if our church was better known as a hub for the community, of meeting needs, of bringing people together, of addressing some of the things that are concerns in our community. And then people found out, it's also a church. Like right now it's the opposite. Like we are a church that people are surprised that we're concerned about certain things. And it's like, what if we inverted that? Like what if our church became more of a community hub that met needs, and in the process people realize, man, these people are about the kingdom, they're about the gospel, but they care about us, they love us. And so we really want to invert that somehow. And that means we're going to have some very unconventional ideas. I won't explain them all right now, but that's some of what we're planning to do. So I will say this, our basement will become a leadership center.
Right.
a shared space, shared kitchen, because we have a lot of people who need kitchens in Midtown, a shared artist studio, and a place like this, audio and
A
video,
dungeon,
a place
podcast
where
room.
things like this can happen, where people can reserve the space. Ideas of maybe even the building becoming a common, a shared workspace during the week when we're not using it, right? And we use it as a church on the weekend. So those kind of things, and that's going to require like some innovation and people coming in to help us to build some of that. And then the other piece is spaces like this church, right? That is an amazing location, but it needs a little work, right, here and there to be up to where we need it to be, and for people to come and help us to renovate those kinds of spaces so that we can use them well, right? It has a amazing kitchen in it that now, like, we have all of our food truck, the main ingredient, which is one of the ministries that has come out of Mosaic, Pastor Michael, who's a chef. He's going to have a food truck that's going to be ready in a few months.
Bless him.
Yes. So it may show up in Traverse City sometime.
Come on, Michael.
To help you all. But those kind of spaces, right, where we can see another idea. We have a pastor who wants to start a therapy barn, right, that during the week it is a therapy barn and a place to have horses boarded, but on the weekends it's a church. Because I don't know if you've ever been around equestrian communities, but they often do their shows on Sunday mornings, right?
That's right.
So they're in their shows on Saturdays and Sunday mornings. Like, when did they go to church? The barn church would know when they would need to go to church.
That's a big thing down in Oklahoma is cowboy churches.
It's huge.
You'll pull in. They got like the big barn and the rodeo arena.
Yeah, and that sounds crazy in Detroit, but riding horses in Detroit is actually a pretty popular thing. Yeah. And so we have these kind of ideas and people who feel called to these things. So helping create spaces where they can live that out. Another example, one of our elders who has a passion for recovery, during the week, her and her husband for many years had flipped houses. So they flip houses. That's part of their kind of their income and their livelihood. But then felt like there was this gap, right? She had seen the recovery ministry we do at Mosaic. Mariners Inn is one of our partners. And she saw this gap between when guys were coming out of recovery and then finding housing once they came out of this residential program. Like, that gap was a huge one. So you know what she did? She took 2 of the houses that she had flipped and made them recovery houses that were Christ-centered. Like, she did this without a budget from the church. Without any,
she didn't ask you to organize it?
She did not ask me to organize it. She did it without our permission.
Yeah. I love
that, right?
Yeah.
Love that. And so now, like, you remember this? You can do it, we can help kind of model. And so now we have this person who's a marketplace person, right? Who also found a cabin, and these things do exist. There was a cabin in the city of Detroit that was laid out. That was a historical space. She found this space, renovated it, and made it a community center for the people on that block. So now the people in that neighborhood use this house as a community center for convening around things. So we have people like that, right? The Nasambis, the Michaels, the Joys, who are people who are called, and not all of them are pastors. Like, many of them are marketplace people too. And so we want to create a leadership center that develops those people, that meets needs in the community and addresses some of the concerns that we see in the city of Detroit. And we want to be a place where equally marketplace people, schools, nonprofits, as well as vocational ministry, churches and denominations, we want the leadership center to be an equal partner in creating things that meet the needs of those 2 spaces. And there's a tension again, right? Like this marketplace reality, because I'm also an entrepreneur, right? I'm a founder of a nonprofit. I've had a coaching consulting business for years. So I'm not just a pastor, but I think entrepreneurially. Yeah. And so part of our hope is that we can do things in our community in Detroit that doesn't just look like the church, but looks like people of influence who serve an amazing God. And so you don't have to know that I'm a pastor to know that I love Jesus, right? But you can see me loving Jesus in the marketplace, loving people in business dynamics, loving people in schools, loving people as contractors. And so part of what we want to create are spaces where that can happen more readily. So, yeah.
So one more question there. How can the Tabernacle pray for you? Pray for your church too.
Yeah.
But how can we pray for you? Because you lived in Michigan for more than a minute, so you get that. But you're still Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, that Carolina blood, come on, you and your wife both.
Runs deep.
And here you are in Detroit, Michigan.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So how do we pray for you, and how do we pray for your church?
Yeah, I think first thing is, just that prayer of, Lord, don't let me get in the way. I think the second prayer, is like knowing what to say yes to and what to say no to, right? Like we're in a season where there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of potential partners. And one of my biggest prayers is, God, help me to have a healthy no so that we can say yes to the right things. Because I think one of the enemy's schemes is to throw a lot of good opportunities our way. Good. And we just need to have the discernment to know not just what is a good opportunity, but what is a God opportunity. And so, and sometimes they look very similar on the surface, right? That looks great. That looks great.
But it can't do it all.
You can't do it all. Can't do it all. And my prayer, not just for me, but for our team, is that we would have the discernment to know. Like the other thing that we're doing right now is we are coaching and supporting a lot of churches who are trying to navigate some of the dynamics culturally, racially in our country. Some of them are in our denomination, some of them are not. And these opportunities are developing, and we got incredible staff, a multi-ethnic staff, men and women, young and seasoned, people who've been in different spaces. And one of our prayers is, God, help us to know how to do that well. Because see, the cool thing about Pastor Mick is Pastor Mick was a former missionary. So he knew how to raise support to do the kind of work that needs to happen in Detroit, because you can't function in Midtown Detroit on the tithes and offerings of the people who come to our church. You just can't, right? You just can't. I don't know the exact percentage, but I would say somewhere around 40% of our church is close to poverty level, 40%, right? And so as you think about that reality, the ability to function in Midtown Detroit with a building, like you can't do that with tithes and offerings. And so he did a great job of raising support, similarly to how he did as a missionary. Yep. I'm not wired that way, right? Now, I'm not a raise of support kind of person, but I'm a person that develops and trains and equips people. And so one of the ways I turn my attention towards that kind of fundraising idea is serving people who want to know how to grow in this particular area. And so we've turned some of our attention towards that. Like, how do we help churches? How do we help? We're about to sign a contract with a university here pretty soon, where we're coming in to help that university navigate this as well. And so just pray for us that we can say yes to the right things,
right,
and say no to the things that, not that they don't matter, but they're not for us right now, or that we can refer people to those things that we trust, so that we can continue with the mission and vision, and we can live those out in our values. Because ultimately, what we want is we want to make disciples.
Yeah.
We want to see the kingdom advance. But it's easy when you have a lot of opportunities to get overwhelmed with them and not be able to do anything well. And that's the last thing we want.
Well, I know that we as a church have talked and just started the talks of how we can grow this partnership. And so I want to say on the air, what is this, podcast 54, 55? We're not sure.
No, I have no idea.
Yeah, we've lost track. We've done a lot of them. But I want to say on the air, we don't want to add to that cloud. And I want you to feel, well, I know you will, but feel free to say no, because you and I have talked about, hey, we got to have some exchange programs, because I want to preach a Mosaic again sometime, and would love to have you up here.
Absolutely.
Was that a yes?
That's a yes.
Okay. Yeah, we'd love to have you up here. And, we talk about student stuff, so we can talk more and more about that. But, man, I'm fired up about what God's doing down there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you. Thank you for coming, giving us some time. Putting a face with the name, putting a face with the ministry. So I'm fired up too. It was cool.
I think we should put the website.
Absolutely.
Can we put your website in our
if
little
you look at the show notes,
things?
we'll have to learn more about Mosaic Midtown, and all of that will be right in the bio. So
Sweet.
Absolutely. Awesome, man. Well,
thank you for having me.
Appreciate you, for sure.
Yeah. And you're rocking the right hat, right? Like you got this Detroit Lions hat.
Paul said to the week I became weak.
I'm preaching on that.
Win the week.
First Corinthians,
to win the week.
What, 9?
Yeah.
So, absolutely. Man, we have a special guest, all this stuff. You know what we didn't have?
What's that?
didn't have any cakes.
We didn't have any cakes from Trace Cakes.
No cheesecake. This is the part where we act like we're a real
dessert.
podcast.
Yeah.
And we try to get monetized, even
So-
though we never will be.
If you're ever blessed, Tracy Kalita makes unbelievable cakes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, I'm a pie person,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, if I have the choice between cake and pie, I'm always choosing pie.
Mm.
But I'm not going to say no to cake, and I'm not going to
Absolutely
say no
not.
to Trace Cakes.
To a cupcake. She made these oatmeal cream pies one time.
She has her own business. She makes some sweet,
I'm telling you, man.
yeah. But
you.
Hey, did you
there's
see her
no
April
Trace
Fool's
Cakes
joke?
here? I did not.
She dropped an April Fool's joke that was like, due to the busyness of my schedule, I'm having to get rid of some things. And the comment section blew up with, if John and Britton would have read this, their lives would be ruined. And I said, yeah, there would be no more podcasts. You keep the lights on.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, but no. Yeah,
So we love
Trace
Trace
cakes.
It's
Cakes.
love language. It's a
But
sixth
we've
love
eaten
language.
enough Trace cakes that we had to switch to zero sugar Coca-Cola.
Yeah, because you
I have
got
my
two.
water bottle.
Yeah.
I'm not participating.
Oh.
I'm a bad guest.
Yeah, we got two pastors.
Yeah.
We got two pastors on diets right over here.
Absolutely, yeah. Man, Skylar Bibles, you preach every week. Might need to get this guy a Skylar
You an
Bible.
iPad guy, or you use leather and paper?
I both, but I
Both.
usually mostly use iPad.
Yeah.
Yep.
This guy's a both guy.
At the same time.
I'm old school.
Mm-hmm.
Now listen, I have preached from an iPad before. I have done that on the road before, but I had a conversation. We'll talk about it later. I want to be. I'm leather and paper.
Yeah.
I'm leather and paper. Get yourself.
A specific,
Sometimes it is
specific
not
Do you have a
friendly.
goatskin Bible though?
Yes.
See, when you
Okay,
get a
yeah.
goatskin and it
That's
drapes.
next
Oh,
level.
come on! When it drapes like
Okay,
a
so
washcloth, you know you
Before
feel.
you even go,
Like Charles Stanley.
why would you get a goatskin Bible? For all the people out there that are like, why do you guys spend money on this? Why would you get a
It
goatskin
lasts
Bible?
a long time.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you were
it's
going to build,
soft.
and if you were going to build houses every week, you probably wouldn't buy a hammer from Walmart, would you?
Yeah.
Hey, but for the people that read their Bible once a month, they can get a cheap one.
Yeah, they
You know, these ones we're using.
Oh, that hurts. Now we're talking smack on the podcast.
Martin Rizzi.
Yeah. Oh, Martin Rizzi with his pleather Bible.
Oh no.
No, man. Appreciate you coming.
It's a joy.
Yeah,
Joy
it
to
was
have
awesome. So
Thanks for
until
having me.
next
Benji-
time, Ben, you got
Yeah.
anything to add?
Benji, what do you got?
You got to give him one question.
I have no questions, but
Okay.
I just want to say seventh love language, guns.
Guns.
Oh,
Okay.
Sorry.
Welcome to Buckley,
Sorry,
Michigan.
welcome to Redneck Country.
Welcome to another space.
Yeah, welcome to,
Did not expect that.
That was, I didn't either. That's my kid. He's given his time to Jesus.
welcome
That's
to
his
Buckley.
seventh love.
Absolutely.
Well played, son.
Love it. Until next time, this is Santes, John, Benji, and Britton signing off.